Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome in to the Six Screen Sunday edition. Now, we do something different here on Sundays. What we do on Sundays is we get into theology. We get into the scriptures. Now, don't go heading for the mountains. We try to reach the former Jehovah's Witness world as well as Christians and people trying to connect with Christianity. So, welcome in today. We're glad you could come and spend some time with us. Now, we do have a program on here. It's called Knowing God After Leaving the Watchtower. And, a lot of people, sad to say, when they leave the Watchtower, they distance themselves from God altogether because of the teachings and policies of the Watchtower. The Watchtower tells the witnesses that they are the true religion. And if you ever go to another church, you'd be having demons and evil things happen to you. So when the witnesses leave the organization, they're very hesitant to connect with other Christians or even want to believe in God anymore. They spiritually abuse people. But we have two Christian apologists coming in here today. One is Jody Bishop. He is in a truck in Nebraska. He's got a ministry here on the Six Screens as well as his own with Scott that'll be on shortly. And Jody drives a truck. He drives all over the country. And he loves Jesus, and he loves to speak about Jesus and talk about good Christian things while he's driving. Now we go have a man named Scott Walton as well. He's going to be coming on. He's from North Carolina, and he is also an apologist. And we're going to bring them both on right now. So let's do that. Let's bring them on the stage. Add them both here. Let's see now. I'm just trying to do this. All right, there they are. So hello, Scott. Hello, Jody.
Howdy.
Hi, Rick. Hi, everyone.
So I guess we're getting a little echoing here, Jody. It might be coming from your end. Let me just see. I'm going to mute you. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, it's coming from Jody's end. 1, 2, 3. So, okay. So evidently Jody might have. I'm not sure what he's doing. Jody, are you on the StreamYard link as well as the phone? Are you on both at the same time here? No?
Actually, I am on the phone. I was trying to be because we recently had a network outage here. I lost internet. So if it should suddenly go down, I may disappear. But if it does, I'll call in as soon as I can.
Oh, okay, Scott. So let's do it that way. So I'll bring Scott back on. Maybe I'm not Scott, but Jody. All right. All right, Judy. You're unmuted now, Jody. So why don't you guys let us know what you're going to be speaking about today?
Noah's Ark today. Last time we did the flood. Today it's the Ark.
Very good. Well, we're looking forward to that. And what's Jody have to say? Jody, what do you want to say to the audience?
Well, I got a prayer request that the audience could pray for. I ran into a non-practicing Jehovah's Witness yesterday at a truck stop, and I request prayer for him. He is a thinking JW. He knows it's not the total truth. He served in our military, but he was never, a member of the Jehovah's Witnesses. But just keep him in your prayers, and maybe we can even get him on this program one day. Who knows how far the Lord can lead. And remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Disciples of YHWH in Christ. Pray for us. Email us if you got a question. I mean, who knows? Your question might become a program. So who knows where your question might lead. So I'm going to look forward. I mean, this is a fascinating story. I mean, there are scientific evidence all over the world for the Ark. So I'm just, I'm just really excited. I remember one of my friends who is a very great science major, great in science and the Bible, but he went on an atheist program, and he couldn't. I mean, he talking about the Ark, all his answers was, I don't know. Well, I believe Scott could be on the program, and he'd do just fine. So I'm looking forward to it. So God bless.
Excellent. All right.
Okay, well, welcome everyone to our show. We're the Disciples of Yahweh. Here's our email address on the screen if you're watching live, disciplesofyahweh@gmail.com. And we always spell Yahweh without vowels, YHWH, just like you find it in the scripture. And of course, we have a YouTube channel. I think Jody mentioned some of these things. We do a worship service, or basically church on Sundays, and you can call in and join us. But today we're going to talk about Noah's Ark. Now, last time I talked about the flood of Noah's day, the great flood, because both the flood and the ark are two things that people tend to have doubts about. The Bible is clear about this global flood and this Noah's Ark thing. And a lot of skeptics and atheists and even believers have doubts about Noah's Ark. How could he get all those animals on there? Is that really realistic? Can you build a boat that big out of wood? And on the doubts pile up. But, so last time we dealt with the flood. And the reason we're looking at these topics is because when people come out of the Watchtower, they're ready to be done with anything religion and Bible. And because it's, one thing I said at the conference, if you were beaten over the head with a phone book, you might be afraid of phone books, just kind of a phobia. Well, people in the Watchtower have been beaten over the head with Christian doctrine, with God and Bible and everything, not literally, but as a form of spiritual abuse. And so it's understandable that just out of fear, a kind of phobia, you want nothing to do with God and Bible and Jesus. And so when people come along and tell you, oh, you can't believe that, it's not true, the Bible's full of all kinds of fairy tales like Noah's Ark, then that gives you a reason to doubt. And it's exactly what you might want. Or we might be talking about your relatives, your loved ones who are still in, and they come out and then they say, I want nothing to do with God and Christ. But the Knowing God program is to help people to know God and draw closer from wherever they are, including us. As we do this program and study more, we draw closer to God. And that's what I want for everyone, because that's what's best for us. Now, let's talk about Noah's Ark. And, okay, so we talked about the flood before. You can't have an ark if you don't have a flood. And there's good evidence for that there was a flood, global flood, all the fossils, the continents, broken up, the ring of fire, all that stuff we dealt with last time. Now, we can look at this evidence and we can examine the evidence that we see today and say, yeah, it's compatible with a flood. We can't prove it scientifically, and it can't be disproven scientifically. But when it comes to the ark, we have a different situation. There's no evidence for an ark, right? We don't have any leftover remains which we can look at and say, yeah, this looks like an ark. Now, several people have thought that they might have found the ark. None of them have proven it to, even to their fellow Christians. They haven't proven it. And so we're still waiting. Maybe they'll find the ark, maybe not. It might be gone forever. I mean, wood does not last for very long. It can decay. Then again, it can be preserved like in ice. So, we'll just set that aside. Let's deal with what we have. And that is to ask, is it humanly possible? Because if the ark is impossible, no one could possibly build a boat that big. You can't get all that many animals in there. Well, then we go, yeah, this might be. There's reason to doubt if it's completely implausible. But if we can say, yeah, it's possible, this could have happened, then it's up to, everyone to say, yeah, I believe the Bible or I don't believe the Bible. But at least I want to show you that it is plausible, because, yeah, it really is when you look at the text. Now, a lot of people go by not what the text says, the Bible, but what they've heard this guy say or that guy say. But we're going to look at the text and we're going to deal with questions, including questions that came in the Christian court. Now, in the court, we have very little time to answer questions, so I got to give the short answer. But in this show now, I want to take a little more time and deal with things like how did he feed all those animals? What about the carnivores? How did he get animals from all over the planet, including on other continents? How did he sex the animals? Determine, I've got one male and one female, and you're not, oops, 6 months later, oh, these are both males. Embarrassing. Right. So questions like this and others, I'll deal with few. And then, hopefully we open the phone lines and get your questions, or I'll look in the YouTube chat when we get to that point. Okay. So let's deal with the first skeptic's doubt about Noah's Ark. Can you build a boat that big out of wood? Because some people are saying, oh, you can't build that out of wood. And, primitive people, they didn't have the tools. They didn't have, computers. They didn't have steel. And no, they didn't have steel. So how could they make a ship that big? There have been modern navies, modern European navies that tried to make wooden ships, back in the days where they're kind of on the cusp between metal and wood. They tried to make large wooden ships. They weren't practical. They didn't work out very well. And they did not go with wood. Obviously, they went with steel. Steel is a lot easier for making a ship. So if it's difficult for modern men with all our tools to make a large wooden boat, 400 feet long, why think the ancients could do it? Well, for first thing, that's very important with the ark. It is not a ship in the sense that it's going to sail. It has no power. It has no rudder to steer. It has no masts, sails, none of that, no oars. So that greatly simplifies things. The ark has got to float. That's it. It's got to float and not capsize. It doesn't have to, steer, doesn't go under power. So that greatly simplifies things. And what we do see, though, there are some historical records of very large wooden ships built by ancient civilizations. One famous example are the treasure ships of Cheng Ha. Cheng Ha is he was not Chinese by birth, but he lived in China. He had been captured as a youth. He grew up and became a big deal in the court of the Chinese emperor. And he built these treasure ships to go exploring around the world and trade and bring things back to the Chinese emperor. And his largest ship was recorded to be over 400 feet long with 9 masts. So he solved the masts problem, or his engineers did. 9 masts. Think of all the sails you could hoist on there. And he had a huge fleet with lots of big ships. But, Noah's Ark being around 400 some feet, we have here a record of a ship that was around 400 feet, made of wood. So it is possible. Now, we don't have any of Cheng Ha's fleet either. And this is, by the way, a fascinating story. If you want to go read about the treasure ships of Cheng Ha, that is fascinating. The emperor actually ordered that the ships be burned. Burn them all. And he just destroyed the treasure fleet, said, we're never going to go out there again. We, China, are the greatest, most advanced civilization on the planet. And they were. So what do we need with these outsiders? And, that's part of the story of China. Anyway, fascinating, but evidence or suggests that, yes, we can build large boats. And the Greeks and the Romans built some large boats. The Roman Emperor Caligula had his naming ships. They were large pleasure barges that floated only on a lake, right? So again, simplifies things. You're not on the sea. But he had these large boats. And the Greeks, the Macedonian Greeks, specifically the followers of Alexander the Great, they built some great ships like Leontophoros, which was about 400 feet long, and also the Thessalonconteres. These Greek names are fun to say. Leontophoros and Thessalonconteres, excuse me. Again, about 400 feet. Now, the ancient Greeks, they knew how to count. So if someone could say, hey, they couldn't have built that. They knew how to count, and they knew how to measure stuff. Eratosthenes, ancient Greek, measured the planet, and he did a really good job of it. Came as accurate as he could for the time in which he lived. So the Greeks could count. When they say, we had 800 oarsmen on a side, that's 1,600 people rowing an oar on, I think that was Leontophoros. They could count. They know how many people they have, and they could measure the boat. So we have records of large wooden boats in the past that give us the understanding it's feasible. And of course, there are modern reconstructions. Some people have built an ark mock-up, maybe a museum like the one in Kentucky, which I've been to, and we'll talk about that. And also a guy named Johann Weber, a Dutchman, he built first a small model. And when I say small, I mean 230 feet, about half size model of the ark. And then he built a second one, a full size model. Both of these are floating and they are in the water. They're probably not good enough to go onto the ocean, but hey, he built them a lot faster, right? Noah had nearly 100 years. Johann Weber built his boats in a couple years, and it was just he and his sons working on it, and they had modern equipment. Of course, that makes it faster. So we do see these boats; they can be built that big. Even there are reconstructions today. All right, so. Now, when people, here's the thing that I would point also to. When people look at the ark and say, we can't build a boat out of wood that big, impossible. Not, the ancients couldn't have done things that we moderns can't do. I say, well, look at the Great Pyramid of Giza. Anyone built a Great Pyramid? And when they look at the size of the blocks, modern people say, we have no idea. How could they have done this? Or at least they did. And so this is where you get all these rumors that it was the aliens. It had to be aliens. Humans can't do this, or giants. There was also some. Anyway, never mind all about that. But now we have some idea of how they could have done it. We don't have proof, but there are craftsmen today that still chisel out rocks, and they can make big stones that way. We know you can drag them or put them on rollers, even with ancient technology. And now there are theories. The fascinating one is water, the water theory, that they use water to build the pyramid. For example, the Great Pyramid is pretty much level. How do you get a level surface? Yeah, you just put a bunch of water out there. Water becomes level, and then you know where to start your foundation. How do you get the large stones from the quarry, which is far away? You float them down the water. And it's likely that back then when they were building the pyramid, there were more canals. We have evidence that there were canals and that they built some trenches. So now the volcano theory of how the pyramid was constructed, it's a fascinating one, has the blocks coming under in water and then shooting up the central shaft and being placed on top of the pyramid. Anyway, there are ideas about how they could have built the pyramid, even with the technology of that day. And there it is, it was built by humans, not by giants or aliens or angels or anything like that. So that's just, what Lewis called chronological snobbery. Modern man looking at the past and saying they couldn't have done what we're smarter than them. We're so much better than them. Well, we're so much lazier than them. I would point out none of us have built a pyramid. And, only that one Dutchman has built a full-size ark that can float. So, and the pyramids, great. By the way, the pyramids are also fascinating. They weren't built with slave labor. That's what I was taught. Slaves built the pyramids. No, they hired all those people. And again, we have records. The Egyptians were great record keepers. They hired people. They paid them. We have inscriptions and writings that demonstrate this and document it. Okay, so that's the you can build a wooden ship, and I'm going to see if Jody has any comment at that point. Jody, you got anything to say about wooden ships?
Well, I got some things to say, but like you said, the ancient people was not stupid. There are forefathers. We came from them, and they had a lot of technology that we don't even know about, and they had certain kinds of concrete that we can't even replicate today. I mean, a lot of they had ships that shot fire, but we don't know exactly how they did that either. So they had a lot of technology that we don't even know about. Now, what kind of technology Noah had, I don't know exactly. But I know that, God could have physically done it, but I believe, according to the Bible, that Noah built the ark and his family, and he could have actually hired some of the other people to do the ark. And there's a lot of indication, just like you was talking about, the man who built a full-size Noah's ark and it floated, like you said, the ark don't have to do nothing but float. And it'd be a lot more complicated putting sails, put a steering wheel on it. But it just had to float, and it just had to keep all the animals. And, they could put miniature animals in or baby animals. There's all kinds of, things that they could have done to make the ark possible.
Amen. Yeah, and one last thing before we leave the building of the ark, I want to point out something that's very interesting. We have the dimensions of the ark given in the Bible. It's 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, etc. Now, if you think about that, what that means, it's very long and very narrow. It's we know from the dimensions, it's 6 times longer than it is wide. Now, think about the big oil tankers and the cargo ships that have all those cargo containers on them. What shape are they? It's about the same shape. They're very long and very narrow. Why is that? Well, we've been determined by, floating across the ocean by using computer modeling that shape is the most stable in large ocean waves. That's a deep sea ocean going vessel has that characteristic shape. And what do we find of the ark? Same characteristic shape. How amazing is that? Now, imagine if someone wanted to say, oh, this is all made up. It's mythology. Just people made it up. Yeah, but it was written down in 1400 BC when there were no deep sea ocean going vessels. People didn't go out on the ocean. It was too dangerous for them. So how did they know the proper dimensions for an ocean going vessel? One that was so stable on the ocean that it's been calculated the ark could survive 30-meter waves. 30 meters, that's nearly 100 feet high, and not capsize. That's amazing. What a optimized design. And yeah, the people who have studied this say this is an optimized design. Okay, if this was made up by ancient people who'd never been on the ocean and didn't have computers to do modeling, how'd they get this optimized design numbers? Well, it would have to be revealed to them by God. And that's what the Noah story is saying. And so this lends an air of plausibility. This is, shows that the dimensions are correct. Now, we actually do have some other stories. It was mentioned in the flood, or in the chat. Debbie mentioned there are other cultures that have flood narratives. That's right. They're found all over the planet. It's pretty amazing. Now, one of those flood stories that we know of is from the Epic of Gilgamesh. And in Gilgamesh, the king meets Utnapishtim, who is the man who survived the flood. He's the Noah figure in the story. And Utnapishtim was told by one of the gods to make an ark also. And he made the ark with the dimensions, width, height, length, all the same. Get that? Length, width, height, all the same. This is your ark. What is it? It's a perfect cube, right? Like this. I brought a cube to show you. Now imagine this bobbing on the water. Imagine this floating. What's going to happen to a cube with the waves and the wind and all that stuff? Well, it's just going to spin and spin and spin and in every single direction. And imagine that's your boat and you're on it with thousands of animals and all their waste products. What happens when a boat goes spinning in every axis? Everybody's going to get sick. Everyone's going to die. This is the kind of dimensions you would get from a made-up story by ancient peoples, where it was mythology, and so dimensions didn't really matter. They weren't trying to be practical. They weren't designing a deep-sea ocean-going vessel. They were just making something up. And a cube is perfect, in that mythological, theological kind of sensation or idea world. A cube is a perfect. Sphere is perfect too. So the idea that the ark would be a cube, totally impracticable, but it makes sense in the mythology. So that's what we would expect to find in the Bible. Some, made up numbers or some perfect numbers. But the Bible has the optimized design. I think that's very strong evidence. Okay, next question. Is it big enough for all those animals? Now, it's really hard to wrap your mind around how big the ark is. And if you want some idea, I would say go to Kentucky and see the Ark Encounter Museum. I've been, here's a picture. I'm putting the pictures up on YouTube and Facebook if you're watching. Here's a picture of Nadine and I at the Ark. It was a fun day, and we had, actually, it took us 3 days to see the whole thing. It's absolutely massive. Here's Nadine standing by one of the little support beams. I can't even hardly get her and the boat in the same frame. Now I zoom out a little. She's way at the bottom. You can see the top of the boat, but it just dwarfs. That just dwarfs her. It's massive, and even the pictures don't really do it justice. You have to be there and stand on it to see how large this thing is. The only other experience I've had that comes close was being on an aircraft carrier. Nadine and I also went to see the USS Lexington, which is in Corpus Christi, Texas. And, you know, if you've heard it said floating city, yeah, it is. It is amazing how big a carrier is. And that's a World War II carrier. That's an old one. We make bigger ones now. Noah's Ark is like that. It's just so incredibly massive. You can't really fathom it until you walk around in it for days and then go, okay, this is big. Okay. So it is big enough for all those animals. But the question becomes, how many animals? And what the skeptics will say is, oh, how did you get every species of animal on this planet onto that boat? Because our scientists have identified nearly 1 million species, almost 1 million species. So you'd have to have 1 million, well, 2 million, right, of everything. That's impossible. I would agree. That's humanly impossible. But that's not what the text says. It doesn't say he has to get every species. When you actually read through there, and think about this, fish don't need to be on the ark. None of the sea-dwelling creatures, which include, by the way, mammals and reptiles, dinosaurs, none of those have to be on the ark. They can survive a flood. It's just more water. And even with salt water will float on fresh water. So you can have a large saltwater body that's floating on top of a freshwater body. So all those creatures can survive that. Plants, you don't need any plants. Bacteria and viruses, or little microscopic organisms, you don't need those. All the archaea. So again, that eliminates a lot. And insects, you don't need insects. They can survive on floating debris. So which animals were needed? Well, when you read through the text in Genesis 6, Noah is told to take the birds, the beasts, every creeping thing on the ground, right? And take every sort of food that is eaten for you and for them. And he's told again, the beasts, the birds, everything that creeps on the ground, 2 by 2. And then later on, it says after the flood, and this is in chapter 7, that all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. So we're only talking about land-dwelling creatures and only those who breathe in through nostrils. Now, insects don't breathe in through nostrils. They don't have lungs. So that lets out all the insects. And again, they wouldn't be wiped out by a flood. They can survive on floating mats of debris, and there's going to be tons of debris when a global flood happens and wipes off the dirt and the trees and everything else off the land. Lots of floating debris that they could survive on, and decaying plant matter, plenty to eat. So all he needs is the land vertebrates, birds, mammals, reptiles, and maybe some amphibians, the ones that won't survive. Now, someone would say, isn't that still thousands of species? Yes, but who said you have to take species? God didn't say take every species. He took take them according to their kinds. Now, when we ask what does kinds mean, the Bible doesn't really define it. But when you go back to Genesis 1, where God created everything, he said they reproduce after their kind, right? Giraffes have baby giraffes, gorillas have baby gorillas, and horses have baby horses. Things reproduce after their kind. In other words, when they breed, they make more of themselves. So this kind would be more likely at the family level, or sometimes the genus, but not the species. Now, if you remember from high school biology, your animal, the categories, classification system, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I think I said that in the right order. We're talking about the family level, not the species, and sometimes genus, because our classification system is a little fuzzy in places, but at the family. So, for example, take the family of dogs, family Canidae, the canids. All the dogs could be they're one family, and they could be considered one kind. That is to say, all dogs the dogs, right? They reproduce after their kind. Dogs produce dogs. And several of the dogs species that we have can breed with other species and even hybridize. And hybridize is like, when you have two slightly different species that are both in the same family, they produce infertile offspring, right? Like mules, for example. So and it's more likely also going back further in time before they essentially devolved, because we're undergoing genetic drift. Our genes are getting dirtier and more broken. It may be that going further back, it was easier for them to interbreed, even among the different ones. So it's entirely possible that all the dog kinds we have, all the different kinds of dogs, descended from one pair, two animals that were on the ark. There's no problem with that genetically, and in terms of the variation that's available in the dog genome. If we just look at the different breeds of dogs that we've made, humans have bred for all kinds of different things. And we have large dogs, small dogs, wide dogs, narrow dogs, dogs with long pointy noses, dogs with smushed faces that hardly have any nose. All this tremendous variety in just, what we've been documenting, just a few hundred years. We don't know what people were doing before breeding dogs, but now we have lots and lots of dogs of all kinds of different varieties. Well, the same thing could be true for the pair of dogs that was on the ark, gave rise to all the ones that we have over the years since then. There's no problem with that again. So then Noah would only need one pair of dogs, one pair of cats, one pair of horses, one pair of sheep. And so, sheep are clean animal. You need 7 of those, 7 pairs. But the calculations have been done, and even conservative estimates put it around 6,800 animals total to be on the ark, and those on average are about the size of a ferret. Okay, so we got some that are smaller, some that are bigger. There's not a lot of the larger animals, and as Jody was pointing out, you bring the young. You don't want to bring the fully mature, the largest size of large animals. You bring the young ones. And so there's plenty of room on the ark for that many animals. By the way, there is a zoo in Omaha, Nebraska, the Henry Doorly Zoo, one of the largest in the world. According to the number of animals, they have 17,000 animals. So Noah had a lot less, and you can house a bunch of animals together. So it is possible. There's plenty of room. That's the point, especially given the size, the average size. And again, we're taking juveniles whenever we can, the young ones. And there's actually a very good reason to take juveniles. Because remember, once these animals come off the ark, they've got to repopulate the entire planet. And so you want them to have the most amount of breeding time available. So it's ideal if they come off the ark just as they're reaching sexual maturity, because then they have the greatest amount of time to breed more of their own species in order to repopulate the earth. And that's especially true for large animals with long gestation periods. They need more time, more breeding seasons to create lots of offspring to get a good genetic, a gene pool. So you want the little ones, and the little ones take up less space. They eat less. They produce less waste, and they're ready to repopulate the planet. They have a longer lifespan ahead of them. So and that saves on size. So there's plenty of room. Again, if you go to Kentucky, walk around, and by the way, if you don't live in the U.S., Danietta, I think, was in the chat. She mentioned that she had an opportunity to go see Johann Weber's, the Dutchman's first model, the little one, but it got damaged. But now he has the bigger one. So if you can figure out where the bigger one is, if you live in Europe, maybe you can go see the full-size ark that Johann Weber has built. And there's one in Southeast Asia. I forget where. So if you live in Southeast Asia, they have one too. So everybody's got access to or the potential to go see Noah's Ark reconstruction. And there's plenty of room, and you just really got to see it for yourself. I would encourage, if you get the chance, Go to the one in Kentucky. We had a great time. All right, so I'm going to check with Jody, see if he's got anything to add at this point.
Right. Well, even myths and legends of the flood could be told from Noah's Ark, and gradually over thousands of years, the myths and legends happened, but it was based on a true story. So just because it's a myth and legend now, because it's not a true story now, don't mean it didn't originate from a true story. So I think one of the great proofs of a worldwide flood is all these civilizations that didn't know each other or didn't communicate with each other. They all got these myths and legends about a flood, either a really great regional flood or a great worldwide flood. So I think there's a lot of truth in myths and legends, and then they just gradually over time get fabricated where they're not a true story anymore. So Debbie really had a good point there. And, scientifically, we got evidence, like you mentioned, only about 6,800 animals could be on the ark. It'd be plenty, there'd be room left over. And there have been countless people like the Dutch guy that built the ark, and and then the one out in Asia. So it's not only possible, it's probable. And if God created the world, he can make whatever happened happen if he wants to. So I believe this story, and if you don't believe Noah's flood, then I guess you've got issues with the Bible too, and that's another conversation. So very fascinating, very interesting story. And the New Testament people, they believed in the ark. The New Testament verifies that the Old Testament is totally true.
Yeah, that's a really good point that we talked. I think I mentioned this last time that Jesus had said, as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. And when they went into the ark, he mentions the ark, he mentions Noah and the flood. And, so yeah, if Jesus believed it, we who are Christians believe Jesus. Now, let me quickly go over some of the other questions, like the ones asked in the Christian court, some of which have been re-asked in the chat. How did Noah catch all those animals, even the ones on other continents? Well, Noah would have never been able to catch all the animals, and he wouldn't have known, by the way, all the different kinds. Make sure I've got every one. Where are you going to get this list? Even today, we don't have a list of all the animals on the planet or all the species. We may have identified nearly 1 million, but they're still making new discoveries. So no way Noah's going to do that. God had to bring him the animals. Noah's not going to go out and catch all these animals. And remember, after the fall, it said the animals were going to be afraid of mankind. There's no way wild beasts are going to come meekly to Noah just because, or, he's going to go out and capture them all. That would take too long. That's too much work. And also the question was, how does he know the gender? How is he going to check the sex of all the different animals? Now, God's got to bring them to him. And that's okay, because this is a story about God interfering with the course of normal affairs, right? The earth doesn't flood by itself globally. God did that. And there are several stories in the Bible where God asks a person to do something while God does a miracle at the same time, right? So for example, Noah is told, wave your staff over the Red Sea, and the waters part, right? Did Noah do that? Does Noah have that power? No. Does a wooden stick, his staff, does it have the power to part the sea? No. God did that, but Noah had to do his part. Noah was asked to wave his wand. At Jericho, Joshua and the Israelites were told, march around the city, and then on the last day, blow your trumpets, and the walls fall down. Well, do trumpets bring down walls? No, they don't have that power. God did it, but he asked the people to do their part. And so with Noah, he asked Noah, build this boat, and God would have to bring him the animals. Now, the text doesn't say that, but it's just, this is one of those things, what God can do and God would do to, frequently is seen to do. God does his miracles while the humans does their part. Now, what about the animals on other continents, right? Did they swim across, these land-dwelling animals? Well, no, it actually was that in the days of Noah, there weren't other continents. In fact, you go back to Genesis chapter 1, and it says, let all the waters be gathered in one place and let the dry land appear. Well, if all the waters are one place, then there's only one continent, one giant continent. As we see that the continents that we have today are puzzle pieces, they can all be fit together. And so what happened when the great fountains of the deep broke up and to bring about the flood, that continent was broken apart. It was broken apart, and that's where we got our continents. So Noah didn't have to go to other continents, or the animals didn't have to swim to get there. They could just walk. And so all the animals were brought to Noah by God. And another question that I saw, this was a funny one. Why didn't they have to wear oxygen masks, or where'd they get the oxygen to breathe? Now, the reason this comes up is because it says in the text, all the high hills were covered to, a depth of 18 cubits or whatever it is. And so, well, if you think about the highest mountains on this planet, there's no oxygen up there, or it's not enough for us to breathe. And so if the waters were even higher, and Noah and his family are floating on top of those waters up in the high atmosphere, if there's not enough oxygen, how did they breathe? Well, this again goes back to that whole thing about the continents. The mountains, the high mountains that we have, like the Himalayas, were pushed up when the continents crashed together and pushed up those mountains. That's how continental plate tectonics works. We know that. We see them still moving today, very slowly. But in those days, they were moving fast, and they pushed up those mountains. So Noah didn't have high mountains. And so when the waters covered the earth to all the high hills, plus 18 cubits or whatever it was, no problem breathing. You're still not high up in the atmosphere. But that's a fun question. Okay, now the big one. How do you feed and house and get rid of the waste for all those animals? And the one question that came on the Christian Court is, what about the carnivores? How do you keep them from eating the herbivores? Have you ever been to a zoo? That's an easy question, right? Keep them in cages. Or in, what do they call them? Those habitats, right? If you want to be really good, like the zoo, keep them in a habitat. So, and that's also good because you need to know where they are. You can't just have them wandering around the ship willy-nilly. We need to know they're here so we can bring them their food so that the carnivores won't eat the herbivores and so forth. Okay, so how do you feed them all? Let's say you have 6,800 animals and only 8 people to do the work. Well, you automate things. Even ancient peoples could do that with simple systems. They can automate certain tasks. You keep their food bins near their cage. So, maybe you just have a little door, you open it up and a little food goes in. We have those dispensers for cat and dog today, right? Or you have chutes that bring the food down, and you just open a little chute and it pours into their trough, right? And so they eat from the trough that day, and you come back again tomorrow and do it again. And what about the waste material? Now, this is a big deal. You got all those animals, you got a lot of waste. And, I had a horse, by the way, in Panama. I know about mucking out stables. You don't want to leave that stuff piling up. Right? So there have been all kinds of solutions proposed. Again, you automate things. You don't want to be doing this for 6,800 animals every single day. You might have something like slatted floors where waste falls down underneath. And then, by the way, they got lots of water. So this is a good time to use water, just like the Egyptians with their pyramids. Flush the lower deck where you have the, the waste material collecting, flush it with seawater. And so just let it go out to sea, and you clean out lots of cages all at once just by opening, a sluice gate here. And you have to design the ship. Yeah, but that's a big important thing. You got to get rid of all that waste. There are also systems that farmers have been using, or people who keep animals have been using for hundreds of years. In the northern climates, they will keep the animals in during the winter because it's too darn cold. And so they have different kinds of waste removal systems, like the deep bedding, the Potstall and the Gloopstall. These are, Europeans who live further up north. The reason they have Scandinavian names is because that's where you got to keep your animals indoors over the winter. So it can be done. You can keep animals indoors, and you can automate both feeding and waste removal. And that's what you got to do when you got a huge number of animals. Okay, so what else was there? Um, I'm gonna stop right there because there are people who want to ask questions. So I want to open the phone lines and see what questions you guys have. Questions or comments about Noah's Ark? Go ahead, shoot. *6 and speak up if you want to.
Hello,
ask.
Scott.
Hello.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's Donnie here in England.
Hi, Donnie.
I've enjoyed what you and Jody have explained, all the logistics. Wow, there's so much to know. I just wanted to ask about. So it started raining. Now, as in the Watchtower, they always taught us that this was the first ever time that it had rained. Is that so?
Very good question. Yeah, there was this theory, and it was actually created by Christians. The idea that there was a vapor canopy over the planet, this mist that was kind of outside or in the very upper atmosphere, if not outside the planet altogether. And that this blocked out the sun's rays, and that prevented people from aging. And that's how they lived to be nearly 1,000 years old. That theory has been abandoned by scientists because it's completely impractical. Now, you'll still hear the vapor canopy theory, and they'll say this mist was just floating up there for thousands of years until it finally fell to the earth in the flood, and that's where all the waters came from. The problem is, if you had all that vapor up there, when it becomes a liquid again, it gives off tons of heat. All that heat would cook the planet and burn off the atmosphere. Everything would die. So no, I mean, even Noah and all the animals on the ark would die. There'd be no oxygen. You couldn't restart the ecosystem without miraculous intervention. So no, that idea that it never rained before has been abandoned by people who have evaluated it scientifically. But unfortunately, it still lingers on, and you'll hear it from people. So no, I don't think that that's a good way to read and understand the text. Does that make sense?
It does, but I'm just thinking, if it had rained before, I mean, after the flood, God said, I'm going to cause, there's going to be a rainbow in the sky from now on, just to remind you that I'm not going to do this again with the flood. So does that mean there was never any rainbows before that when it rained? It's a bit odd.
Yes, another good question. Okay, so if you think about other examples, there are things that pre-existed, they're being given symbolic value. So for example, the Passover lamb, you have a lamb, it represents it represents Jesus. Well, there were lambs before they were designated to be the Passover lamb and therefore be a symbol of Jesus. So when those things happen, you give new meaning to existing things. Jesus told his disciples, eat the bread, drink the wine to remember me. Well, they had bread and wine before that. He was just giving them new symbolic meaning. Well, when God mentions the rainbow and says, I've put a rainbow in order that you will remember that I will never again flood the earth, it's taking something that already existed because the laws of physics are not changed by God. And he's just giving it new symbolic meaning, new value. Now the rainbow is a memory of this thing that it wasn't before. So that, I think, is a good way to explain those things.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I never thought of that before, but yeah, no, thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thank you for your questions. Anyone else?
Well, I'll jump in here, Scott. This is Rick. Hey, really, really good job explaining that. And you know what really ticks me off to some degree, though, in the ex-witness world is not only in the ex-witness world, but so-called people who want to just rebuke the Bible and have nothing to do with it. They're going to look for every excuse in the book. And of course, Noah's Ark is something that all of these critics have always picked on. And how could that ever happen? Well, you explained it really well. I never really thought about the oxygen part of it. on how the mountains weren't as high. So that covered that base. As far as the species of dogs and what have you, you covered that base. You covered all the bases really. And for people to continue to mock this, if they would just sit down and think about it, this very well happened. And for them to, say it's just a story, it's a fable, it's really unfair they do that. It really is, because they're not really examining all of the information that's needed to draw a conclusion. But you gave that today, Scott. Good job. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's not me that came up with all these solutions. People have been thinking about this issue for a long time now and writing books. There's a book called Noah's Ark, A Feasibility Study by John Woodmore. And he went through all these things. How could you feed these animals? How many animals are there? How could you build a boat? What kind of construction material? Everything was thought through. And, these ideas have been kicked around. And the one, about the vapor canopy I mentioned that Donnie asked about, that was an idea that was proposed at one time, and then it was later abandoned because it was seemed to be impractical. So, we're still working these. It's like the Egyptians, how they build the pyramids. We don't know for sure. And so new theories come along, but we end up with, there's lots of plausible ways you could build a pyramid, and there's lots of plausible ways you could have built the boat, put all those animals on them, fed them, and so forth. So this is just something that has been discussed. It's been thought over, and it's fascinating. I find all this stuff fascinating. And here we are discussing it. So it's not me that came up with all these answers. I was just sharing. Anyone else want to share? I saw a comment that I liked. Beverly said, I don't put God in a box. Yeah, God can bring a flood on the earth. God can bring the animals to Noah. And yet he also always asks people to do things. It's not God's going to do everything for you, right? God helps those who helps themselves. That's not in the Bible, but it is a good principle. God isn't expecting us to just sit around and do nothing while he does everything. Also, I saw in the ark, or in the chat, I don't know why I can't say chat, people talking about the ark that's been found here. This guy's found an ark. Lots of people have claimed to find an ark. And I mentioned this at the beginning. No one has really produced the level of evidence that has convinced all the other, Christians, researchers, explorers. You can find wooden structures, but who says that they're the ark? How can you prove that? I mean, you age date them. They don't go back far enough to match the dating of the flood. So it's good to be skeptical about these things until the evidence comes, and maybe it will. And let me say this other thing. Think about this. Imagine you're Noah and the family, the 8 people who have survived this thing. You come down in this ark. The whole planet has been resurfaced. Everything's dead. There's no buildings. There's no infrastructure. There's nothing for you. You got to build everything now from scratch. And by the way, the trees, which are just regrowing, there's not a lot of lumber. And even if there's broken off trees, they're waterlogged. They've been soaking in water for a year. But you have this ark. You got all this fresh wood that's been cut and planed, and it's, straight, and you got building materials. So what are you going to do? You're going to cannibalize the ark to build your houses, to build a town. And as you get more and more people coming, you still have this wonderful source of pre-made lumber until the new trees can grow to a size that it allows them to, make new lumber for your construction. Or you might live in caves and become cavemen. So anyway, the point being, though, the ark may have been cannibalized. The pieces may have been taken to use to do other things. It might not still have been intact to be preserved anyway. And wood doesn't last very long unless it's somehow preserved. So I think it's unlikely that we would find the ark. Now it's possible, again, if it's up on some high mountain it's been frozen, and there have been ones that were in ice where they said, well, but this could be it. Maybe. But let's be skeptical until we get really good evidence. That's my position anyway.
Well, it's a good position you take, Scott. It's just, it's amazing to me. At the outset of your narrative today, you did speak about man building such a massive structure. Now, I'm sure there's engineers that would say, wow, how did Noah and his sons build this massive ship, so to speak, or ark? I like what Jody said too about it. It wasn't really made to be some ocean going vessel. It just had to float. That was all. But, when you go into a city, even today, and you look at the skyscrapers, you look at these huge buildings that little men can actually make. It's just amazing to me all the time. Man can do many things if he really puts his mind to it. And we have to remember, too, that in Noah's day, God was with him. So you got to bring some godliness into all of this, too. I mean, God, he's the one that can give these guys the spiritual fortitude to go forward and build a massive structure like this. But even if that wasn't the case, men could do it anyways. Just give them time. It's amazing what man can do. But I really enjoyed your sermon, your narrative today, Scott. It's sensible. And I hope that there's people who might be listening to this, whether live here today or whether in the archives, that they'll give some serious thought to Noah's Ark. And, don't totally run away from it and say that's just a fable. This is something that you proved it today with a lot of evidence. And if a person listens to this today, they're going to come to a newer understanding. They're going to really look that this certainly could have taken place. No question about it.
I see in the chat, Scott, Moses was told to wave his staff over the Red Sea, not Noah. If I said it wrong, I apologize. You know the story. Why is it as that question that people ask is, what is it? How many animals did Moses bring in the ark or something like that to try and trip you up, and people fall for it. And so, I don't know. Those are easy to confuse, I guess. I apologize when I misspeak. You guys usually know what I mean.
Well, Scott, that's a good thing sometimes when you see that, because it shows they're paying attention, they're listening, right?
Amen. Yeah. Thank you for paying attention and correcting. I don't know when I'm making a mistake. If I did, I would correct it myself. So yeah, I appreciate you guys pointing that out. All right, let's finish up. Today we were talking about Noah's Ark, and this is the Knowing God program. If you study the Ark, like Rick said, don't just listen to what everybody says. Do some research yourself. Look into this. You don't have to believe it because I said it. I wanted to show people that it's plausible. Go out and do some research. There's lots of people that, like I said, have studied this and thought about it and have potential answers to questions you might have. The people who built the Ark in Kentucky, they're connected with Answers in Genesis. There are other creation ministries that have done work into thinking about how could you build an ark and answering all these questions. So look into it if you're curious. I find this stuff fascinating. The building of the Great Pyramids and Cheng Ha's treasure ships. This is fascinating history for which we have records. There are myths also, like Utnapishtim, and we can tell the myth from the history because the history is plausible. You got a ship design that's actually going to float and not capsize instead of Utnapishtim's disaster boat. But the most important thing about the ark is it's also a symbol for Jesus, like the Passover lamb. Jesus is now the ark. He is the one that can save you from the flood of God's wrath, which is coming on Judgment Day. So just like Noah and his family climbed aboard the ark, you need to climb aboard the Jesus train in order to avoid being taken away in, like he said, as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. On Judgment Day, the people who are with Jesus will be saved, just like Noah in the ark. And the rest, well, you know what happened to them. So we urge you to climb aboard the ark of Jesus and look into that also. He's the only one that saves. And this is the Knowing God program for today. I'm going to give Jody the last word.
Well, great program. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot of stuff myself. I've always been a researcher, and I enjoy history. I enjoy, the Bible. And the reason you should believe in Noah's flood or Noah's ark is because it's true. The reason you should believe in God is because God is real. God is true, and God is true. So He wouldn't lie to you. And remember to pray for us. And until next time, until 2 weeks from now, we'll see you later. But email us or subscribe to our YouTube channel or even join us on Sunday morning. We're out.
Well, very good. Very good, Jody and Scott. Listen, I have to tell you, too, I'm laughing a little bit, a little humor. I'm looking in the chat here, and Debbie Moore, our good friend Debbie, we love Debbie. She had a question. I don't think, Scott, anybody ever asked about the Ark. Maybe not even at that museum in Kentucky. But Debbie wanted to know, it took years really to build the Ark. And how was it that Noah and Noah's sons, that is, how was it Noah's sons and their wives didn't have a lot of children during that time? She was wondering if they had birth control back then. Nobody's ever asked that question. Debbie, you got a mind and a half there, I'll tell you. Well, thank you very much, Scott and Jody. Appreciate you coming on. Now, why do folks don't leave us now? We got another program coming up here. It's called Ex-Jehovah's Witnesses Share Their Story of Being in the Watchtower. That's coming up next. Thank you, Scott and Jody, and be safe, Jody. And we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Appreciate it. Bye now.
Bye-bye. I'll be on at 4 p.m. for the Christian Court. Join us then.
Very good. Thank you, Scott. Yep. Bye now.